Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. In the previous lecture, we studied about we have been covering methods involved for ecological impact assessment. So in which we had already seen the definition part, and we also saw methods involved for the baseline study. So today we are going to look at what are the methods involved for impact prediction and how do we undertake evaluation based on the impact prediction which we have done. So accordingly, the coverage would involve that we'll look at various impacts on ecology. What are the direct impact, what are the indirect impact, residual impacts and cumulative impacts, and then we'll look at the types of impacts as well. Then we'll look at different guidelines which are available, and then we'll look at different methods which are available for assessing the flora, fauna. And then we'll look at methods which are available for testing the significance of the impact. So the expected learning outcome is that you should be able to identify different impacts on ecology. What are the direct impacts, what are the indirect, what are residual and cumulative impact, and then you should be able to identify different types of impacts. Further, you should be able to list different guidelines which are available, and then you should be able to identify and select different methods available for assessing flora, fauna, what kind of impacts are happening, and then you should be able to identify methods used for evaluation purpose of testing the significance of the impact. So moving on, you see that for the purpose of impact prediction, in this particular domain, you find IFC guidance on the biodiversity conservation and sustainable management of natural resources. And we see that IFC guidance recommends that you can also use ecosystem approach for the purpose of evaluation. And for this, you should also refer to red list of IUCN, which we also discussed in our previous class. So while you are doing the impact prediction, it is also advisable that you take care that you also have mitigation measures in mind, and it is well integrated in the process of impact prediction. So not only looking at the impact in isolation, but also consider the mitigation measures. Recollect the EIA process part where we studied the impact assessment and mitigation measures. So what are those processes and how you should interconnect them. So impact can be lesser with the mitigation measures. So that you need to consider at this point as well. So it's also important that when you are looking at the impact, you not only look at the direct and indirect impact, but you also look at the residual impact. So looking at that is also very critical in this case. And seeing what is residual impact. So residual impact is the balance, the remaining impact after mitigation. So you have certain development activities, because of that there are impact, then you take certain mitigation, you resolve, you lessen those impact, but still after those mitigation also you have certain residual impact. So that is called residual impact. And one needs to also see that in the overall process there is no net loss of ecology in the natural habitat. So you all saw the terminology, what is natural habitats. So meaning you should not lose any ecology in the end in the process concerning the natural habitat. Further, where you're dealing with critical habitat, if you may recollect the definitions we studied in the previous session. So, in case of critical habitat, you should rather focusing on net gain. So, you should not only lose, no net gain or loss, but in case of critical habitat, you need to gain. There should be gain. So, you improve the critical habitat. So the IFC Performance Standard 6 gives you like what are the direct impact, what are the indirect impact, and so on. So that has to be seen in the area which will be affected by the proposed development. So looking at the direct impact, you have there are a range of direct impacts, like you can have habitat loss. There can be loss of habitat, there can be disturbances in the habitat, there can be emissions related with air, then there can be deterioration or changes in land and water, and then there can be changes in the surface hydrology and changes in the landform as well. And then you also have sea edge effects, like what happens in the boundaries of these habitat, and then there can be forest gaps. There can be like discontinuity in the forest areas, and then there can be loss of provisioning ecosystem services. If you remember, we had studied ecosystem services. So whatever provisions are there, so there can be loss and reduction in those. And then even there can be a limitation in how much you are able to access those services, ecosystem services. And then those services like the regulating services, cultural services, and supporting ecosystem services. So these can be direct impact. Now you can also have indirect impact, and which might include like there can be accidental introduction of invasive species, and then they can spread as well. And then you can also have project induced third parties which can come here. So you might be introducing some more things in the area that could be plant or animal. And then there can be in-migration and associated impacts on the resource use. So there can be a lot of people coming in, and then there might be people coming in, and there might be impact on how much resource is being demanded and used and exploited in the area. Looking at the types of ecological impact, and then there are three types of disturbances which happen. That is, one is said to be the pulse, means very temporary disturbances, and then there is a press, which is like a sustained disturbance, which goes for a longer time. So those kind of disturbances can also happen, and then there can be catastrophic, like something which has very intensive impact, negative impact, and which you cannot really change. So you see these kind of distributions, and then you have you see that development can we often give very negative examples, but then it can have both negative and positive impact on the ecology, and it can create habitat, and one can also have a good management system in place. So just looking at some of the impact types, major broader categories. So you see that big threat is the habitat destruction and fragmentation. So habitat gets lost, damaged, and there is fragmentation, habitat fragmentation. And all these depends on what is already there in the area, in the project area. And these kind of damages and fragmentation can happen because of range of activities, sequential range of activities in the project, from the phase of construction, operation, and decommissioning. And in a lot of cases, many cases, one cannot avoid destructions. So the significance of the habitat destruction will depend on the range of factors. Like there are certain factors on that, how important the significance of that particular impact will depend on. So you see that the ecological conservation value of the habitat, so what kind of value is assigned to that particular habitat. So based on that, the significance would vary. And what kind of species are there, and if there are very rare species, notable or protected species, the significance will increase. Then also it also depends on the degree to which the species which might be displaced because of the proposed project, what is their capability to migrate to another place and migrate and survive those changes. So it will also depend on their ability to travel and adapt to the newer places. So that all will depend on what is really available in the nearby areas and how dense are those areas, and will they be the other habitat would be receiving them or not. And then it will also depend on the quantity of habitat lost. So how much like really is being affected, what kind of percentage is affected by the development activity, and how much fragmentation will happen, like how much you would, because of the activity, how much it will break down into small pieces. So that is what we call habitat fragmentation. So how much will that happen? And because of that, how much integrity will be retained or compromised in the case. So how those areas, despite of interference, how they can work as one unit. So it will also, the significance of the impact will also depend on that. And you need to see what will happen to ecotones or edge communities or communities living in the adjoining areas. So you also need to see that. So you have already seen what is ecotones. We have studied it before. So you also need to look at the indirect impacts, the possibility of flood and so on, which might happen. So that is how we look at the significance of the project. So many a time, because of the project and kind of changes that will happen, you see that new obstructions or blockages are created between habitats. And these blockages can be like physical, which prevents wildlife from moving from one place to another. For example, you must have most of the time seen that that you have roads, you have rails, you have canals, pipelines, and all these moving, which interferes with the passages of the animals to go from one place to the another, or it divides their habitat. So those can be the physical barrier which one creates, and sometimes one also creates behavioral barrier, like you create environment in which no longer those wildlife are unwilling to enter and to those newly created environments. And furthermore, you see that the kind of barrier which is created can be also dangerous to their life. And a lot of it can cause death, like while crossing the road, many of the animals die. While crossing the railway track, many of the animals die. So that kind of hazardous situation can also come. Because of habitat fragmentation, there is increased isolation. So one is the habitat is getting fragmented, plus when these things get fragmented, the habitat also gets isolated. When we say isolated, that means it's getting disconnected with the other areas. And this interlinkages is very important because that connects the habitat to the larger network of habitats. So habitat fragmentation, if you look at it, how important it is, it's one of the indicator of unsustainable or sustainable development, and it's given due consideration in the World Bank environmental assessment methods. So this is used as an indicator how much habitat fragmentation is happening. So that's important impact to look into. So what really happens when such kind of fragmentation happens? You have small patches of habitats, and usually they become very insufficient in terms of resources, like there'll be not enough food, water, or sites which are feasible for the population of this some of the species. And many of the species which reside locally are they become vulnerable to disasters such as droughts, fire, and so on. And you will also see that some of the species need several habitat patches because they keep moving and traveling. So now they just don't limit themselves to one patch, but they need several habitat patches. So small patches are also susceptible to edge effects. So and isolation. So edge effect can also happen. So let's look into what is edge effects. So edge effects are related to the like something edge meaning boundary. It's related to increased length of habitat edge. So more and more you are creating the boundaries, like more and more you're exposing it. So more and more edge is created. So compared to the total area, you have much of the periphery boundary area. So that's said as edge effects. And when there is larger and larger edge, then we see that we have more species that live on the edge compared to species that live in the core area. So fragmented habitat patches are also susceptible to external impacts, like more and more when such fragmentation happens, then they are much more exposed to pollution because of the roads and other things coming here. And then physical damage can also happen because of continuous activities happening, and there can be disturbances also. And it is seen that some species are more influenced by the pollution, physical damage and disturbances than the actual size of it. So they really get disturbed by these things, and they're sensitive to the pollution, and then they also get physically damaged. And we also see that when fragmentation happens, edge effects happen, then these areas become more susceptible to the foreign species also, which can move from the neighboring areas. So trying to understand isolation, what do we really mean by isolation? Generally, we see that species travel between habitat patches within larger ecological network. For example, elephants keep traveling, and any impact on the habitat patch which works as a source or the sink can create isolation. So no more they are able to travel to their particular sink or the source. So because of these things, it affects the species' ability to disperse, where all they can go. So it really affects that. And then it also affects the nature of land use between the habitat patches. So what kind of use is being taking place. And then degree of isolation between habitat patches also is affected. And then like the distance, what kind of barriers are coming, and then it get isolated, and many times it doesn't survive that. And we also see that habitat fragmentation also limits the regional dispersion for many species. So species which travel from region to region, it also limits that. And it is said that it's a very serious concern, and it's very much connected to climate change. And this fragmentation has impact on local ecology. And survival of many species depend on their ability to disperse, how they are able to move around. And we see that now the challenges are increasing. So we see that significance of these barriers which are created. So you're looking at the impact that the barriers are created, then looking at the significance of these barriers also vary. For example, some species have like efficient dispersal mechanism, and so they can quickly move away, and then they are not really affected. But some species which have low mobility, who do not disperse, might would stay there, or might vanish after some time, and they are forced to stay there, and they are not able to adjust to the kind of change which is happening. Further, the other kind of impact we see is the habitat damage, wildlife disturbances, and direct mortality, where the death can take place. So we see that there are causes of habitat damage, like you can have vegetation trampling, where with the movement, this damage to the vegetation. There can be plant damage, or you can be removing the plants, and then there you might be, during the construction, you might be compacting the soil, and also there can be soil erosions. And mostly these things happen during the construction phase of the project, and often it can be irreversible. And then there are other causes like traffic, recreational visitors, pressures, and so on. And then there can be also a lot of people hunting. So all those kind of things can also happen during the operational phase of the project. So those are the causes of habitat damage we see. And such kind of things cause destruction of microhabitats, and then they lead to disturbance in the whole ecosystem, and it tends to simplify the habitat. So lot of the complex things, how they are interrelated, they simplify, and it loses its complexity. So for example, river bank stabilization, development of canal. So like you see the meandering rivers, but then they are straightened, and so then it reduces lot of plants and invertebrates diversity, and it simplifies the habitat. So those kind of changes also happen. And the need of species vary at different life cycle also. So some species would have certain requirement at the younger age, and then at the later, so on. So all those habitats are also changed, and those transformation happens. Looking into the wildlife disturbances, so you see the primary cause of that is the construction, traffic, or visitor pressure, and then there can be other things also. You can also have visual impact. There's noise. There is like people's movement, frequent movements, people walking around, and then there can be also light pollution. So those kind of things can happen, and animals can be susceptible to these disturbances, and especially such kind of problems can be more severe in times of breeding periods. So you see such kind of your details of which period might be sensitive might differ from country to country, and from species, habitat to habitat. So and it won't be easy for you to identify those periods, so you need to look at those guidelines which help you to find those periods there. So other thing, now looking into the direct mortality, this also happens because of the similar vegetation destruction and trampling and fire. And majorly you see that roads presents a serious long-term threat, and especially to the animals which needs to cross, which needs to move. And in one of the example, it was seen that casualties happen just because of the road deaths. So you can see those examples. So that was about the second type of impact which you saw. So now moving on to another impact, so there's pollution. So there can be pollution with air and water and so on, and every species would respond differently to that. So usually it is said that the range of the quality is very narrow usually for the habitat, and it's very slim for every type of habitat. So how much really they can adjust with the change in the quality is very limited. So any change in the range damages and risks the habitat. And because of the development, and not only because of the development, and sometimes even because of the accidents, there can be a change in the quality level of the environment in the vicinity. So particularly looking at the water levels, so you do see there's change in the water level because of the changes in the both ground level and the surface level, and this causes major impact. And you see that the seasonal variations are important for the sustainability of the habitat. So it can be particularly important, like how the seasonal variation happens in the marshes, grassland, wetland and so on, and especially during the breeding seasons. So these are important thing. So if it doesn't, those variations stop, there's limitation in that, so it has further impacts. And then you also see the changes in the hydrological system and climate can also impact. So there you can see like soil droughts, then you can also see loss of wetland inhabitants. You also notice that there is also impact of increase in the water level. So that also has impact, and like it increases the chances of if the water level increases, it increases the chances of inundation. So how frequently it will happen, how long it will happen, so those things will also change. And then there will be increase in the water logging of the flood plains, and then it might adversely affect several of the diversity. And majorly you will see the variations in the ponds and streams would be lesser, and then that can impact a lot of animals and plants. So you see those ponds and streams are usually very important elements for a lot of animals and plants. So you also see that change in the water flow can change its property also. So you see the changes in the oxygen concentration, nutrients, sediments, and the volume, and these kind of changes can be irreversible as well. Further, you see that there can be also change in the competitiveness balance between the species. So a lot of species, you might see that some are very adjustable, adaptable, whereas others are not, might be slow in adapting. So if any kind of change happens, then you might see that the situation favors the species which adapt compared to species which do not adapt or are slow in adaptation. So then your proportion might change, and it will give more advantages to the more adapting species. And it is quite possible that the less adaptable species might be of high value for the habitat. So those things you need to take care of. So these were the impacts which we see. So now moving on, different guidelines which are available. So you see that there are different guidance which are available for the purpose, but it is also suggested that habitat loss or fragmentation is something which one can identify easily, but it is difficult to predict the secondary impact and cumulative impact. So those are complex one. So you see guidance on assessment of indirect and cumulative impact provided by, you can see here cumulative effect assessment and practitioner guide. You can see here from Canada, which is there. I've given you the link for this download here. You also have guidelines from EC and European Commission. So where you have guidelines for assessment of indirect and cumulative impacts. Then you also find guidelines from here. You can see practical toolkit for assessing cumulative effects of spatial plans and development project on biodiversity in England. You can see this as well. So there are a lot of sector-based and national advice which are available. So you can see for UK, you can see for South Africa, then you can also see for Australia. And you can find in India by MOEFCC. So we have range of sector-wise all the like what kind of tools and assessment methods have to be used. So so looking at I've taken up this from one of the manual from thermal power plant. So how that biological thing impact assessment, what kind of tools are suggested, methods are suggested. So you see that you can collect sample plot method, And in that, usually you cannot survey the entire area, so you only identify certain pockets for survey. So that is how scientists work. So you can pick up density and relative density in this. Relative dominance also can be seen, and frequency and relative frequency or important value can be seen here through sample plot method. You can see in the image. And it allows you, it serves a lot of purpose, like you can identify average number of individual species, you can look at relative degree to which species predominates a community, then plant dispersion over an area. You can also look at average of relative density, relative dominance, and relative frequency. So you have certain guidelines how what kind of sizes, plot sizes you have to use for what kind of types of plants. So you can see here from the list. The other type is the transects and line intercept methods. So for this is used, like you can see in the diagram, you have one straight line drawn, and whatever comes within that, you make note of that. So you look at what is the cover, what is the dominance. So this one is used for you create a ratio of total amount of line intercepted by each species and total length of line intercepts given its cover. And you also take out the ratio of the total individuals of species and total individuals of all the species. So you take out all those kind of information. And this, the benefit of this is that it allows you rapid assessment of vegetation transition zones. You see the plotless sampling methods. So you do not identify a point, but you stand at a point and you look at the distance and see what kind of variety you have. So you, it's like through this you can take mean point plant, mean area per plant, density and relative density, what are the dominance and relative dominance, and important values. Importance values can be seen. It allows rapid and extensive sampling. Then the plot method. So this really helps you to do it very fast. Then that was for the flora, and now you look at the fauna. You have species list methods. So you can use all these species lists. So you can see the range of list which is there. Then this list of animal communities observed directly. So here animal species list, with this you can prepare a faunal resource catalog. Then you have direct contact method. Then for this list of animal communities are observed directly, and this method involves collection, study and release of animals. Then you find another method, that is count indices method, roadside and aerial count methods. So you drive and count, and you also see the temporal count, and call counts also you undertake. So here you can see how you have used for mapping and counting animals. So through this it provides index for various species in the area, and because you have indexes, it allows comparison through seasons or between sites or habitats. Then you have removal method, which you see the it is usually used for the population size, to determine the population size. And it is like you number of species captured, you look at them, and it's usually used for estimating the small mammals such as rodents through the baited snaps traps. So through that you do that. The another type you see is the market capture method. Here you estimate the population size. So you see that number of species originally marked, and then number of marked animal recaptured, and total number of animal captured during the census. So then that is how you take it out. And it involves capturing a portion of population at some later date, sampling the ratio of marked to the total animal caught in the population. So based on that you take it out. So this was from the manual by MOEFCC. You also find comprehensive collections of documents, advices by the World Bank. So then there you can also look for range of updates. So those links are given to you. And now moving on to looking at the evaluation part of the impact magnitude. So after you take out the impact, and then now you look at the impact magnitude and significance, how significant it is. So it is said that GIS is very helpful if you have good data. So it helps you to integrate and assess like how things can be done. And then you also find mathematical and statistical models, like you have minimal critical areas, viable populations, ecotoxicology, critical loads, and hydrological processes. So all these can be used. And then from the manual, I've taken like kind of judgment one needs to make to test the significance of the impact is like you look at following checklists, like you look at will there be a large change in the conditions? Here, will new features be out of scale with the existing environments? Will the effects be unusual in the area? Will the effect extend over a larger area? Will there be any potential for trans-frontier impact? Will many people be affected? Will many receptors of the other types, flora, fauna, business facilities will be affected? So what's the number of effect which will happen? And then will valuable or scarce features or resources be affected? Is there a risk that environmental standards will be breached? Is there a risk that protected sites, areas featured will be affected? And is there a high probability of effect occurring? And will effect continue to be for a long time? Effects be permanent rather than temporary, effects be continuous rather than intermittent. So all these kind of questions are seen, and it is difficult to avoid or reduce or repair the compensate for the effect. So what kind of compensation is happening? For each yes, one needs to answer, and then the nature of effect and reason for it has to be given. And based on these, the judgment is made on the significance of it. This was one example of how significance is done. So we have looked into the different methods of it. So looking at the limitation of ecological impact assessments, we see that there is limitation of knowledge and understanding of ecosystem complex interactive process. So there is limitation in that. And there are like limitation of the many models which are available. And then we also see that many of the methods are expensive and time consuming. And it is also very difficult to get sufficient and sequential data, quantitative data to undertake the baseline conditions. So we see all those kind of challenges. And still we depend heavily on the professional judgment. Further, when you see the significance part, you also take care of the receptor sensitivity. So how the receptor is going to really adapt to the changes. And then all these information can be presented in a matrix format where you can show the magnitude and sensitivity of the kind of impact which is going to happen. So you can see some of the examples which are given in the suggested reading. So when you look at the impact, you not only look at the negative impact, but you can also look at the positive impact. And then you need to take a balance between the positive and negative impact. And the attempt has to be seen at the net zero impact. So that is what we covered today. So we looked at the impact on ecology, what kind of direct, indirect, residual, and cumulative impact and types of impacts. Then we looked at different guidelines, and we looked at certain methods which are available, and then we looked at how the significance is evaluated in the process. So this was our key reference for this particular session. We looked at the manual as well as our key textbook for this purpose. The further you can see the suggested reading because our coverage is limited. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have, to share your opinions, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring EIA. Thank you.